right, everybody. So today we are back with Abel Csabai for another Q&A. How we doing, man?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. I have a failed Tempur-Pedic mattress experiment going on right now because I wanted to try it out. And it's funny. So when I was a kid, like infomercials were so big, and Tempur-Pedic, it wasn't just, oh, there's different types of mattresses. It was like a specific thing, and it was like this magical thing. And I just thought, oh, like that's what rich people have as mattresses or something. So
What is that?
you never heard of it? So it's like this memory foam. Like they'd have infomercials where like they have a wine glass sitting on top of it, and people be
Yeah.
jumping up and down. And it's like, oh wow, it doesn't move and all
Hmm.
this stuff. So,
Yeah.
so I get it. And the first, it's been 2 nights. I'm like, this is awful. My neck is destroyed because I guess as I sink down, my pillow does not. So my neck is just like this. So maybe I need to get a Tempur-Pedic pillow as well. So anybody who's got one, comment down below. Tell me what I'm doing wrong because it's got literally the I didn't get the Tempur-Pedic brand one. I got it's not a generic, but it's just a different brand. 100,000 reviews on Amazon, and better reviews than the Tempur-Pedic. So yeah, that was a fail. So maybe I'm doing something wrong there.
Yeah. I tried the pillow, never the mattress. And the pillow was like, whatever.
Yeah.
It's, yeah, I just need a pillow. I realized it took me many years, but now I realize the type of pillow that I need.
Hmm.
And it's always something that is kind of small. And then I always need like a support pillow that I can put my arm onto as I'm
Right.
rolling over. So
Right.
that's
Right.
my secret recipe.
There you go. So so how's the weight now? I know we had some bulking up we were doing.
Yeah. I weighed in intentionally now because I expected that you would ask me. So it was 95.4 or something, which it probably will drop a little bit. Usually I'm not the lightest first thing in the morning, but like an hour or two later.
Okay. Okay.
But it's yeah, I did a bulk. I probably like realistically I probably went up to like 98 kilos, something like that. Like that was my true weight, or
Wow.
98, 99, because I was over 100. Like I think the highest I weighed was like 103 or something, not first thing in the morning, but I was like, damn, I'm a
That's the
big
heaviest you've
boy.
ever been, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Oh
Yeah.
well, yeah. No, I was just thinking that maybe at some point when I got pretty fat, I was, but no, definitely this is the heaviest.
It's
Um,
interesting how well you hold it because I feel like you had to get down to about, well, I mean, you got down into the 160. So for people who are
oh
not
yeah.
using kilograms, so 95 would be around 210 and he was up to around 220. But you hold it pretty well. Like I've seen your pictures, but even now, like, you don't really get a double chin that much. I mean, I know your face is obviously holding more fat compared to when you're lean,
Yeah.
but you don't get this like super bloated like double chin or anything like that. And then, but to get like really, really lean, you're still getting into the 170s or so. So it's interesting. I mean, that's like to get
Yeah.
peeled, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean to get peeled probably, yeah, 170 is because so I was 165, right around there when I was like 7% body fat or so, but that was in 2019.
Yeah.
And even then, so I always say that and still maintain that probably I could have been like 4 or 5 pounds heavier maybe in total. So like well, I say 1 or 2 kilos heavier if I held on to muscle better,
Yeah.
which I think it's not a stretch to say because I was just dieting so aggressively. So and I think that since then I gained some muscle definitely. So I think to get equally lean now, probably I could be like 80-ish. That's what I would guess. But
80 kilograms.
yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically that's if I factor in the muscle loss, which was not necessary at the time, plus like 2 3 kilos more muscle that I gained since then, something like that would be my estimate. And I was down in the low 80s since then. Um, and I was very lean, but not nearly as lean as then. I mean, nearly
Sure.
as lean, but like 4 percentages higher still. And then yeah, like I would guess that. I mean, honestly, now I was planning on asking this, like how much arm size can I expect to retain if I'm going to lose at least 10 kilos if I
And
want to
you're
get
past
pretty lean
16 now,
again.
finally, right?
Yeah, so actually now it's like a little bit over 41 centimeters, which is a big increase, but I mean at the same time I've never been this heavy.
Sure.
So
16.14 for the those in America.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And it's always been the case for me that it would go up to like 40 centimeters if I got up to these higher body fat percentages. But never over 41 centimeters. So I mean that's a big increase, but at the same time I don't know how much I can hope to retain, because like also my waist is pretty freaking hefty now.
Yeah.
So
Do you want to tell
yeah.
people what it is?
So yeah, it's like 92 centimeters or something like that. So
So
I
that is 36 and a quarter. Oof, big dog.
yeah. So it's so I don't think I will ever see again, because I mean if you gain muscle on your lower back and on these areas, like that also adds waist size. So I don't think I will ever go like under 80 centimeters, but I used to be like 78 centimeters, even it's like 75. It was like if I was really peeled and my stomach was really empty.
Yeah.
With a stomach flex, I could get 75 centimeters. Like I don't think that will ever happen again unless I lose a bunch of muscle as well. So, but probably still like 84 or so centimeters is my lean kind of measurement.
Yeah. That's why I don't believe some of these bodybuilders who say they had a 29-inch waist. And some of them I think, sure, but I'm talking like the pros, like the IFBB pros, because
Yeah.
so when I was 130 pounds, I had a 29.5-inch waist, which is not that small for somebody who's that skinny. Now, even if I was peeled, I don't think I could get below maybe 30 and a half, 30. Like I get to a point where it just doesn't really drop that much. Like I'll drop a lot at the beginning, and then by the time I get to 185 down to like 178, it just doesn't drop that much more, even though other places are getting leaner. Now, obviously, I mean, some people like Jeffrey Verity Schofield, I don't understand his measurements. Like, I mean, that's ridiculous. He'll be 220, and I think he's still got like a 32-inch waist or something ridiculous. But
Yeah.
so I mean, I'm sure some of them are like the guy Andrew Jacked, if you know him. Um,
No.
Andrew Jacked was training with Larry Wheels. He's now like competing at the Olympia, maybe like top 10-ish. And some of these guys really do have these freaky small waists, but consistently when I've actually had people measure them, they're not as small as I would have expected. You were an example, actually. I was very surprised early on when we started talking measurements that yours was as big as it was. Not that it was big, but that it was the same as mine essentially at a given weight. Because
Yeah.
if I was 220, I'd probably have a 36 some inch waist too. So a lot of times when
Yeah.
people actually measure, this is something I've talked about plenty of times, like at a given body weight, most of us have the same ish size arms, the same ish size waist. Like there's not actually huge variability. And I think some of the huge difference in how we look is just structural, like in how things kind of come together.
Yeah, but I brought up this example to you guys in the group with Brian that like women are a very good example of this. So like if you look at me when I'm lean and you look at some women that I know, like you would say, okay, like this is a very lean guy. I mean, this is like closer to a chubby girl than a skinny girl for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And like they will have waist sizes like I don't know 72 centimeters or something, and it's like how is that possible? But it's one of those things. I don't know, bone structure probably plays into it as well. Like it's one of those things where you might look at a girl who is like a pretty tall one, um like my wife, for example. Like she's pretty tall, and like yeah, I would guess that like whatever, my shoulder, back, like this whole complex is bigger. But if I try to put on her jacket, I mean, it's comical. Like I cannot even
Mm-hmm.
fit into it. Like no way.
Right.
And it's like
Right.
what? So I'm that much bigger there. Like I wouldn't even think that. So I maybe something like that is going on with the waist as well to some extent.
Sure. Yeah, could be. All right, so we got a lot of questions. Some of these they're a little bit older. We hadn't gotten back in a while. So I'll just start. Let me make sure I go in the right order here. So first question, programming tips for people with unpredictable schedules like university students by Ashad Mazar. All right, that seems like it's a good one for you, Abel. So I'll let you go first.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that if you have a couple of the big rocks in place, so what I used to do, and it's not the best approach, but it is viable. So I think you're going to make progress this way. It's going to be annoying in that keeping track of your progress can be tricky at times, but I don't necessarily think it's less effective. It's just one of those things where it will be harder to diagnose what's actually happening with your progress. But what I used to do is that I would just have basically a list of exercises per week, and I would basically just look at how many total sets I wanted for each of those, and then I would just get them in whatever way I would be able to get them in. And basically it would be just, I don't know, at Wednesday I would see that, okay, like 3 days left of the week or whatever, well, more, right? But how much more do I need to do of each? And it's one way to do it, but you can even make it like looser in that, for example, on my Fit Notes app, which if you're an Android user, I would highly recommend. It's free and very handy. I just see how many sets I did for each muscle group per week. And I'm not even necessarily looking at the exercises necessarily. I'm just seeing that, okay, so for whatever chest, I did 5, I'm looking for 12. So, okay, I have 3 or 4 more days to get in the remaining 7 sets. And so basically it's very much freestyled in that way. Now, like that, I think can work. Its progress is a lot more kind of all over the place if you do this, as in what you're actually tracking. It doesn't necessarily mean that muscle growth is any worse, but it's just harder to track things. And then so basically like every kind of addition in preciseness from then on is going to be beneficial. So like a step lower then would be, okay, you have the exercises, so those are constant. After that would be something like, okay, you have the exercises and you just have some general rules of, okay, I won't be doing an exercise for at least 3 days after I have performed it once already. So that's actually kind of what I'm striving for. So if I did this chest press machine exercise, I don't want to do that for at least 3 full days. So 3 full days off, on the 4th one, I can do that again. So that would be like kind of an additional rule that I have for myself. And with some muscle groups, I try to not do them on back-to-back days. So for example, I train my lower back directly. I try to not do 2 lower back days or whatever back-to-back. So at least a day off in between. So you add a couple of more constraints on top of that, and you can actually have I think, a schedule that looks pretty different week to week, but still consistent enough with the important things that you can actually make it pretty effective. So something like that, what I would say
Yeah.
first hearing this.
Yeah, I think the first time I heard about something where it's okay, just get this amount done in a week was by Alberto Nunez. I mean, I don't know, 7 years ago, a long time ago. And it might have been on pull-ups, but he was basically saying this is just my weekly volume I'm trying to accomplish. And he didn't care how he brought it up. Some people would argue that you need a certain amount of stimulus per workout. We've discussed this a little bit on the channel before. There's no evidence for that, just that there's simply no studies on that, or there's no studies that would suggest that that is the case that I've ever seen. I can kind of understand that though. Like you'd think, okay, if the biceps need a certain amount of stimulus, like couldn't there be an argument that, like if you were to break that down to a set, I don't think you could say, well, you'll do 2 reps and then you'll do 2 reps and then you'll do 2 reps and then eventually hit 10, even though, because each one would be so far from failure if there was sufficient rest. So obviously, to some degree, there's got to be sufficient tension and work done by the muscle in question. Does that extend then to sets? I think it could. I mean, I think it, like, I wouldn't be surprised if an advanced bodybuilder would do better with, let's say, 7 or 8 sets in 2 sessions than like 1 set a week. But again, I don't know. So in any case, I do like the idea though of like, I'm just trying to get this many sets per week. The other thing I would suggest is if you are going to stay with a specific split, have a split that is amenable to changing the days and frequency. Meaning, for example, if you had a setup where like, okay, on Sunday, I train arms, and then on Tuesday, I do chest and back, but then you have an exam on Tuesday, so then you have to do chest and back on Monday, or something happens Sunday, so you have to do arms on Monday. That's not going to work well because now I mean, it's not like this is going to be detrimental. You're going to make no results. But if we're trying to make things as good as possible, it's probably not ideal then if the chest and back comes right after an arm day where you're working so many muscles that are overlapping and then you're going to be weaker on chest and back. So that to me would not be a good setup for somebody who needs to have that flexibility. But just like a general push pull legs, for example, you could have that be anywhere from 3 to 6 days per week and then have a break in between, or if it's maybe it's a week off from school, winter break, you could do 2 sessions of each workout, so 6, and then maybe it's like a finals week and you can only do push and pull, and then you have to do legs several days later. That is a split that's very amenable, and that's not the only one. There's the other ones as well, but something that is amenable to being able to either add an extra day of rest or cut a day of rest depending on what's going on.
Yeah, and it, I think just in a general sense, like that's what I always tell to people. So if you need to cut some of your workouts short, just move over some exercises to the session after, or something like that. Like it's really not a huge deal. Just maybe make a note for yourself so that you know that, like, okay, normally I rest like 2 days in between this lift and some other lift, and like now I only rested one or whatever. Just know what you're doing when you look back at your log later. And yeah, like I was just going to say that it's interesting, the whole like minimum volume per session. So I actually think that this is one of those areas where some really good studies would be helpful, because anecdotally, well, actually, anecdotally, I guess there is not that much support for doing very little volumes per session and then doing that frequently. I'm sure there are some people who have done it, but definitely not the masses. But intuitively and logically, like thinking about it and like extrapolating from other things, it's typically one of those things where you could kind of argue either way. It's sort of like the metabolism thing. Like, so you could make a really good like intuitive argument for high meal frequency or low, or like rest periods. Like if we didn't have any studies, then I think it would be very difficult, because like, well, yeah, like you don't let the muscle rest, whatever, like you accumulate more fatigue more quickly, and more like metabolic byproducts and the growth hormone, whatever. On the other hand, like the whole mechanical tension and how do we optimize for that, that would also make sense. So this is also one of those things where I could make a very compelling argument for why the bro split can be very effective, because like you get a lot of metabolic fatigue and you hammer it with a lot of tension in one session. On the other hand, like because of the better like total higher performance output, the very frequent training with low per session volumes, that also makes sense. So it's, yeah, like some really good study I think would be very helpful here.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be terribly hard to set up. I just think when I look at the studies that have had higher frequency but the same volume, they've always been neutral to, well, I don't say always, mostly have been neutral to positive to the higher frequency. It seems like most people kind of settle in on 2 to 3 times per week, but I think I know there's some that are 6 days a week. I don't know if there's been some that have been 7, but yeah, it's all kind of speculation. You would have to think there's a reason that nobody does that for the most part within bodybuilding, but yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Do small calves equal smaller calf gains? Have you ever seen a small calf turn into a big calf?
I think this you should start out with this.
Yeah. So I mean, proportionally, I would say yes, right? It's like we see the studies where it's like, oh, well, women proportionally build just as much muscle as men. It's like, okay, but proportional to where they're starting, right? And therefore there's smaller net gains. I think you'd see somebody who starts off, they've never really trained, but they're just athletic, whatever, not even. They have pretty good looking 16-inch calves versus somebody who starts with 13-inch calves. Probably the person who started with 16-inch calves is going to be bigger. What's interesting is I would say that's not necessarily the case when it comes to like total body. Like there's just so many examples of people who started as super skinny guys who then blew up like crazy, almost to the point that you can't predict it at all. Like Dorian Yates is a classic example, but Jeffrey Verdi Schofield, like Steve Hall, like there's so many people who start very skinny and they blow up, and so where it almost doesn't correlate. I mean, sometimes you do see that person who's just 16, they don't do much and they're just jacked, and you're like, okay, almost always that does lead to somebody who has a really good response. But the other way around, I would not say. With calves though, I think just because everybody is stimulating their calves to some degree, you kind of already get that baseline. Like it's not like unless somebody's like an invalid and they're just lying around forever. Like you already kind of get some stimulus if you're just walking. That I do think it is somewhat of a predictor. Plus, you also get that you always see that initial shape to begin with, right? Like we talked before, Abel and I actually have very similar sized calves measurement wise, but the shape is totally different. As for the other part about have you ever seen a small calf turn to a big calf? I have never ever seen somebody turn a proportionally weak calf, meaning relative to their whole body, they have weak calves, turn it into a strong point. There's all these articles out there about how Arnold Schwarzenegger, he wore shorts to humiliate himself so that he would force his small calves to become a strong body part. And it's like, find me a picture where he has oddly small calves. Like, I just don't see that. And then find me a picture where it's like this ridiculously standout body part. It was a smaller muscle that grew proportionally with everything else. He had great calves when he was competing. He had fine calves when he was younger. It was all proportional. And most people they grow proportional, and some people they grow less than proportional. Like I've mentioned before, like when I was in high school, I had 14-inch calves and 13-inch arms. I eventually got up to having 17-inch arms, and then I never had bigger than 15-inch calves. So I personally never seen it. I know there's everybody out there with all these different calf training secrets, but I've personally not seen it. What about you, Abel?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't have that much to add because, like, you pretty much said everything I wanted to. Just to emphasize what you mentioned about the shape and how that's so important, because it's we talked about this amongst each other, that a lot of us will kind of end up with relatively similar numbers oftentimes. Like, of course there are outliers, but like most people that we interact with will be like whatever, something between like 5'10" and 6'1", something like that. Arms will be somewhere between 15 and 17 inches, and actually with calves as well, like you and I are a good example. So it's like we joke about like how my calves are so great, even though I don't train them. And like you joke a lot about your own calves, how like, and that's your weakest muscle group probably out of everything that you've trained like very dedicatedly. But actually like my calves are not bigger than yours at all. It's literally just like how long like your shin is versus mine and where the muscle attaches. So it's probably like a lot of people, it's not even really the right question, because like probably a lot of people will achieve very similar numbers with their calves. It's just like what we call good or bad calves, right?
Yeah, yeah. And obviously there is variation. Like I think Brian's are closer to 16. Like plenty of people do have 16 plus inch calves. Not that many naturals that I see have like 17 to 18 plus. But some do. But yeah, it's a lot of, and like that's what the general pop perception is, right? It's like how things look, obviously, because that's what that people care about. But I don't think they necessarily realize how much goes into that. And like you said, with women, same thing with women. Oh, this woman's got such a tiny waist or this, and it's like maybe, but it's just a lot of how things flow together. So
yeah.
And also teaser, I'll be having Eric Helms on soon to discuss his recent calf experimentation. He's doing like a self experiment on it with it's like a daily stretcher to have, I think it's an hour of stretching per day. So we'll see what happens there.
Just thinking of how could I do that with the lats? Can I put that in some kind of a cast?
Can you have Paul Carter on your podcast? Sure. I've never talked to Paul. I only know Paul through people talking about Cass and Brian and all them, but I don't actually really know that much about him.
He would be probably a good guest. Like I've heard him on a couple of podcasts, and he seems like a good conversation partner, and also pretty well spoken. So I mean, I think he could be a good guest.
Yep. Let's see. So how do you feel about pre-workout? I just did the calves one, so if you want to go on that.
Free workouts or three?
Pre-workout, like supplement, pre-workout supplement.
So none of them. Well, I like them a lot. It's just often I train too late for them. But yeah, I think that they can sometimes make the difference between workout that's kind of a drag versus one where I almost feel euphoric and I see myself like 5 times better looking when I look in the mirror. So they can be great, but they just easily mess up my sleep. That's a problem.
Yeah.
You?
Yeah, I never really took them much. I was never a big supplement guy, but I remember taking Super Pump 250 in college, and I took it at 11 a.m. and or for an 11 a.m. workout, so I probably took it at 10 a.m. And I would have this thing with caffeine where I could fall asleep, but it would wake me up early. Somehow, like I guess I must have
Yeah.
just not achieved as deep of a sleep. So I was up at 2 a.m. and I was just like, okay, I guess I'm up now. And I just couldn't fall back to sleep. But caffeine in general, yeah, I haven't had caffeine in years beyond like what's minimally in green tea. And even there, I have decaf green tea. So I pretty much have had no caffeine in years. I miss it because when you barely have it, once you do drink it, like you said, you become euphoric. Like this is awesome. Like I do miss occasionally being able to have that. But it's been a long time. I think as far as effectiveness, it's fine. But as with most of these things, is there actually a difference in the trajectory of your long-term progress using it versus not? The only way I would say that would be the case is if psychologically it just makes you enjoy it more. And so therefore you're more likely to continue doing it. But like the only one I could maybe see having a long-term effect would be creatine. I've discussed this before. It's like, is it just giving you a bump and you're always 2% better than if you didn't take it, or is it actually increasing it exponentially? I don't think anything like caffeine or citrulline are probably is doing that. Maybe creatine is, but again, I doubt it. So I think it's probably like for a PR day or a day where you're really dragging, it's fine. Otherwise, I don't really see the need for it.
Yeah, agreed.
So this one is actually there's two similar ones. So one is thoughts on DC training for natties. Can we get far doing it over high volume training? And the other is out of all the training systems you have, which one do you think is the best for natties? So I would say to be direct about DC training. Yeah, I think DC training is fine for naturals. I don't think like when I was first reading about DC, I had this respect for it. Yeah, I still do, but it was like you couldn't do it until you were at this advanced stage. Like you had to because it's low volume and you're pushing to failure, and then you have to really push hard, and then you do these intense stretches afterwards, and it's pretty miserable to me in a fun way, but most people would not find it fun. And so I do think that most people probably should wait. Like it makes no sense for beginners to do it, and even intermediates, it doesn't make sense. But eventually, I was like, okay, I'm never going to be like 230 lean like a lot of these guys are, so I'm just going to do it now that I've been training for 15 years. But by that point, I was already so far with training that it wasn't doing much for me. But I think it's a good routine. I think it focuses on the key tenets of higher protein intake, getting the calories down. The stretching, I don't think really does much. I think most people who I've talked to have said they don't think it does that much for them. I understand there's some studies on stretching, but most of the studies that we have on stretching causing hypertrophy are on stretching versus nothing, right? Or it adds volume, net volume. So it's like, well, what if the person just did another set? I think it's fine. I don't think it hurts anything. I personally don't feel like I've ever seen much from it, but I think it's fine to do. But no, I think it's a good routine that focuses on the important things. As far as the best routine for natties, it's probably not a surprise that I'm going to say I don't think there is a best routine. I've said recently how I think if you go back 10, 15 years, there was this huge emphasis on these different splits. And thankfully, most people don't talk about that too much these days, where it's like it's going to make some huge difference. I think it just comes down to finding, like, I don't think it's a specific routine. I think early intermediates and all that stuff, it's fine. Like, hey, I'm going to try the Texas method. I'm going to try Bill Starr's 5x5. I'm going to try 5-3-1 or whatever, or fat routine. But I think those are just things to try. I don't think, obviously, I don't think there's going to be a best single thing for all naturals.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, on the split side of things, I definitely agree. And so with DC, so there's the stretches, but it's also like sort of a rest pause type setup, right? So you're resting like 40 seconds, I think it was.
Yeah, yeah. So with DC training, you basically do 3 sets. Well, I call them 3 sets because they say you rest 15 to 20 breaths, which if you just did a set, 15 to 20 breaths, I mean, that's like 45 seconds for a lot of people. It could be even more for some of these big guys. That are like, so,
Yeah.
but basically it's three total rest pause within there. So you do, let's say, like a hammer strength incline press, and you do that as hard as you can, like all out 14 reps. You rest those 15 breaths, then maybe you get 5. Then you rest 15 breaths, then maybe you get 3. Then you immediately would go to an intense stretch with like dumbbells and do like a pec fly kind of a stretch or something. And then that would be all you do for chest until you hit it again 4 or 5 days later. And then the next time you do it, you have an exercise rotation. So you would choose 3 different exercises that you rotate through. So you're really only hitting the same exercise every 2 weeks or so. And then the idea is then you just got to beat it the next time.
Yeah, it's to me, honestly, that's the most interesting part of this. The like how effective is a setup which uses some sort of rest pause compared to straight sets. Because honestly, for me, like my dream would be that it would actually turn out that it's all about volume, and like the more you can recover from, the better. And rest pause is as good as non-rest pause, because then I would like it would be like super easy. Like basically it's just a matter of how much are you willing to suffer in a training session, but like time management would never really be an issue. And it's, I mean, I don't like, I would have a hard time explaining why rest pause, for example, wouldn't be as effective as straight sets, or even more effective. It, to me, it's one of those things whenever someone is asking me about this, is that because we don't know, like we kind of just need to make like educated guesses and do what's like, given everything that we know and see, is gonna have the highest likelihood of working well. Like that's why actually I don't use like the, you know, very frequent training with low per session volumes with many clients, actually maybe like almost with none of them at this point. Because it's like, well, it could be equally good, but like let's just do what, like if I had to put my money on it, this has the highest likelihood of working well. And the same thing with rest pause, like I can totally see it being equally effective, but like it's just yeah, given everything that we've seen so far, it just seems like the safer option to rest like the traditional like 3 minutes or so between sets and whatever. So that's why personally I wouldn't use
Safer,
that.
like more likely to lead to the best results, or safer, like even from an injury standpoint?
Best results standpoint. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, especially on compound lifts, on ISO stuff, maybe it doesn't matter, but to be honest, even there I prefer to rest like at least like a minute between limbs, which, okay, in the case of DC it doesn't necessarily have to be a huge difference. But yeah, so that's my only thing with training systems like this. So like if this guy is asking like what I think is the best split, like there's no best split, but I would say something like a traditional kind of bodybuilding split from like newer times. So 2-3 times per week for a muscle group. And yeah, like in the like 10-ish sets in the 10 to 15 range, something like that. Like traditional kind of rest periods, actually rest as long as you need to. And yeah, like intelligent exercise selection, which you can like easily read up on. And like that's the best system. I think that's kind of like the safest option, I think, in my opinion, is like it's definitely not going to backfire, probably going to work pretty well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I brought this up to Mike Gisertel. I was like, we have studies showing that the longer rest intervals are better, but then we also have studies showing either neutral results or sometimes even positive, but usually just neutral, to drop sets and rest pause compared to straight sets. So it's like, okay, if we're saying that longer rest is better, then how can 3 sets on an exercise be giving the same results as rest pause, which is not only going to have less rest, but also less volume unless you're dropping the weight, right? So if you did a drop set and dropped the weight a ton, maybe you could do more volume just because you're going to be doing higher reps. But in the example I just gave, like I said, maybe you're doing 14 and then you're getting 7 and then you're getting 5 reps, versus if you rested adequately, you get 14, then maybe even if you went to all out failure on all the sets, maybe 14, 11, 9 or something. So now we're losing rest time and losing volume. And yet in the studies, we're seeing the same results. It's like, how does that make sense? The only thing you can really say is, well, maybe the sample size is too small to pick it up. They're underpowered. They're not long enough, maybe. But most of them are similar length. So it's a little odd.
Maybe they're more likely in some of these studies to actually work hard if they're doing rest pause. Like otherwise they would be more inclined to wuss out at like a couple of reps in reserve. And this way, like resting for a short amount of time, like they can't help but go pretty close to failure. Could be that.
Yeah. I like rest pause simply because it's efficient. So my workouts go
Yeah.
faster. I sometimes like it's one of the many reasons that I've stopped liking going to my gym recently is just it gets crowded and I try to superset and there's just that psychological stress of okay, I'm taking up these two machines and like even if somebody's not asking me to go on, they probably want to go on. So I was doing
Yeah.
a rest pause just so I can just do it on one and be done with it. And I do like it. Again, I haven't seen any difference one way or the other, but I've mentioned before, I'm not a good gauge for that because I'm kind of at that point where nothing's really going to progress me, but also not that much is going to make me smaller. So I have a lot of wiggle room. Doesn't mean it's going to make me, it's like the best gauge for everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So Elitzer Bergman, any experience with insane fatigue, tiredness directly after a high intensity lifting session?
So yeah, definitely. And actually there's one video that I even showed it to my wife because I think it's maybe one of the best videos on what true training to failure is like on leg press. And it's Jeffrey Verity Schofield's video on it's something like what true failure looks like or something like that, and then he demonstrates it on the leg press. And like you can just see it, you can just look at him and see his facial expressions and the tone of his voice, and you can see that it's truly a devastating experience. Like he's just like minutes later he's like, I mean, this is unbelievable. Like this kind of thing like ruins your whole day. And it is really like that. Like a couple of years ago I did this like myo rep type set on the leg press, and it was so I was going for 30 reps on the first set and then did like 2 myo rep sets afterwards or something. And and I don't even understand what I was thinking. Like that was the first exercise, so it was even worse. So I still needed to complete the whole workout after that. And it's yeah, like Mike Israel's like verbiage there is really appropriate. I think that it's like a religious experience. Like it makes you question your entire existence and whatever. It's that kind of a thing. And yeah, like after those, the whole day I was basically in this like haze and confusion. Like I just wanted to sit on the couch. Like it's yeah, like some things are just going to take a lot out of you. And honestly, like sometimes I just don't really know the best policy for implementing some things like this. Like even on like Romanian deadlifts, for example, now like I got pretty strong now again, and like strong enough to where I cannot really win with the whole thing because I either go super heavy for me and then I do like 4 or 5 reps only, which maybe is not going to fatigue me that much cardio wise, but then it's like, man, I just don't want to lift weights that heavy, to be honest. Or I do like 8 to 10 reps, but they're still pretty heavy, and that's going to crush me for the remainder of the session. So
Yeah.
basically it fucks up my entire session. And it's not great. And if I do it as the last exercise, then man, like I don't want to lift weights like that when I'm tired already. So yeah, like in some cases, if this is really an issue, like maybe your best bet is just removing them temporarily, like on a diet, for example, if you're like really beat up already. Otherwise it's just I don't know, something to deal with, I guess. Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, well, just real quick on the like where to do it and as far as the order, that is actually why with DC training they do their what's called widow makers at the end of a workout because they're like, okay, after you do this, you're just not going to want to do anything else. So widow maker is basically being like breathing squats where you in theory take a 10 rep max and do it for 20 reps. I think if it was a true 10 rep max, you wouldn't, but maybe it's a 12 or 14 rep max. But the point is you take a weight that's extremely hard to do in that range, and then you got to do breathing reps throughout. So I think so. It's weird. I've had a few sessions where it's like I'm not like out of breath or anything. I'm just sleepy, and it'll just hit me halfway through. Obviously, I'd say it's pretty common to just be fatigued after like a really intense leg workout. I think, like what Jeff said and everything, it's those leg days. I in high school they would haunt me. Like on Saturday, I would do these insane leg days, and by Thursday, sometimes even Wednesday, it's like, oh, crap, this day is coming up, and it's just like haunting. But I think it's also a lot easier. to do those when you think that it's going to lead to progression. And this is something I've mentioned as well, that people really ignore this psychological aspect of it, or they'll say something like, oh, Jared Feather, he's so dedicated. And it's like, yeah, but he had a really good response to lifting. And
Yeah.
whether it's lifting, sports, any like school, you gravitate towards what you're good at. And this is so often ignored. It's like, oh, look at these traits. This person, he wants to do this and he pushes himself. It's like, yeah, like, it's so much easier to do that. Like if you imagine, I think about this with fighting all the time, like UFC and whatnot, where it's like, man, I cannot imagine going through this insanely difficult training camp for 12 weeks. And you're obviously always training, but then the training camp is even worse, and dieting down and putting everything on the line and then getting knocked out in like a minute. And then to like keep going and do that again. Like, how do you get yourself up like the fourth time that happens? Be like, what do I do? Like sometimes I look up these fighters who, I'll see them from like years back. And I wonder what they're looking and like doing now. And maybe they've dropped to a different organization that's not as competitive. And now they're in their mid 30s. And it's like they're still fighting because they don't have anything else they can do. But it's like, how do you get yourself up and be like, well, I know I'm never going to be a champion. I'm just trying to do like this to make some money. Obviously, you're not going to be able to push yourself as hard. It's just because why would you? It just sucks. And I would think, obviously, it's not as bad from a bodybuilding and like lifting standpoint, but like I look back at some of the leg days I used to do, and they were so grueling. And like 225 for 15 front squats, and then I did another set of front squats, like I'm like choking myself out, and then supersetting like a leg press with a hack squat and minimal rest, and like almost throwing up numerous times, and all these things. And it's like, okay, if I'm at a point where I just don't believe anymore that these things are going to do it, like why would I torture myself? Like
Yeah.
if either way, if I can like not do that. Now sometimes with arm days or something like that, like I'll still go pretty crazy. But like I've had periods where I then do go super intense on the leg days and it didn't change anything. So like with Jeffrey doing that, I mean, I didn't see his video, so maybe it was just one set, but just an overall crazy workout.
Yeah.
I
Well,
think you do get to a
demonstration.
point where you're just like, all right, this suffering is not doing anything. So let me just start to do workouts that are enjoyable if it's going to be the same either way.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, it's definitely the case where like it's easy to be very dedicated and to put in the really hard work when things are clearly working. And yeah, like to be honest, like for a long time, like that's why like the YouTube channel, I mean, lately I haven't been great with it, but it's only as big as it is after many years. But actually it's one of those things that I'm the most proud of, because for many years actually, like it really, like the results didn't come. Like I didn't get really subscriber. I never had a phase of like exponential growth. For a very long time I didn't make a cent off of it, and I was still very consistent with it, and it was really discouraging for a long time. And that's why, like, when I look at this, it's one of my prize that, like, wow, like I don't think a lot of people would have been this consistent with
Mm.
the results I was seeing for a long time. And it's definitely, yeah, the fighting analogy is very good. Like how must it be like for those people that, that like big fighters that like, okay, let's make a career, like a great career, build this guy up. And like those first couple of opponents that they get are basically just these punching bags that, like, yeah, like he will get like an easy first round knockout. It will be good for him. And you
Yeah.
look at the record of the guy, and it's like, 5 wins, like 30 losses, like
Yeah.
something like this. Like, yeah, like how do they even train super hard for these matches? Or are they just like, well, okay, let's at least show up not overweight, but I mean, they're gonna beat
Right.
the shit out of me anyway.
Yeah, they probably get paid some amount, just like, hey, show up, we'll give you $500 or whatever. But yeah, it is kind of crazy, especially with fighting where it's so detrimental to your health and everything long
Yeah.
term. But yeah, that's like, I mean, that's a great point though, because coaches who are good will kind of plant these wins in there because there is a huge psychology to it, right? And it's just, I think this is just so often ignored, that when people who are successful are praised, it's like, yes, they probably have worked very hard. And I'm not in any way trying to take away from that, but I gave in my genetics video the difference between my academic success and business success versus the bodybuilding success, and there was a lot more positive feedback in one of them, and not surprisingly, that was almost easier in a sense to keep going because it was just like, oh, it keeps being successful.
Yeah.